transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knoweth the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the shackling clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knoweth the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the shackling clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond the third destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, the supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the shackling clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When no supreme amongst human shall fall on this earth, you haste out seven strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, flame that blazes in the three worlds, winner of the best, to all of you I prostrate. With the supreme science face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Just free like you, the three worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Saviour having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit and qualities like a vast ocean, to you the one gone to vastness I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from mortal wrongs, the one path of subliminality, to the Dharma that pacifies I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you the sublime community intending virtue I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three every devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foul faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. To page 15 for the Heart of Perfection Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagavan was dwelling on the effulgent mountain in Rajagriha, together with the great community of monks and the great trees of the Bodhisattvas. At that time the Bhagavan was absorbed in prostration, and the wisdom phenomena called for power perfection. Also at that time the Bodhisattva master Aryabhateshvara, who from the very practice of the path perfection was also as impure in very nature. Then 3rd power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra, said this to the Bodhisattva master Aryabhateshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of Buddha perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva master Aryabhateshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the Buddha perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly behold those 5 aggregates or sources of form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also none, emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unseen, stainless, not without state, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no theory, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste or object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell on the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration, without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times, also manifestly, completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhisoham. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadataputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, Ashuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. To page 25 for the short mandala. Sashi Bhoge Medo Dang Rira Rishi Ninde Gemba Sanje Shinde Mide Ewa Yi Drugu Nanda Shimla Chupa Sho Gamba Jinam Ji Zergu Kala Jinde Jinde Chitta Sambe Duje Zimama Sabji Chuji Chapa Patu So Guru Lene Mendela Kamniyatayami Sanje Shudan Saji Chanama Chunjo Bada Dani Jasa Targi Chujin Jive Sonam Ji Rola Penje Sanje Trupa So Sanje Shudan Saji Chanama Chunjo Bada Dani Jasamshi Targi Chujin Jive Sonam Ji Rola Penje Sanje Trupa Sanje Shudan Saji Chanama Chunjo Bada Dani Jasamshi Gejujin Jive Sonam Ji Dola Pinji Sanje Dokurash Hangada Dunya Zame Dawada Jempa Mechiri Dameshini Denzeve Kodam De La Chazela Dunya Nyuje Sande Jebe Lang Shishi Sade Kanji Dindyo Gwaran Chanave Ma Dinde Jaza Sawada Dojin De Lundu Sho Banden Zave Lama Rumbu Jin Dagi Nyingara Pime Dishane Godin Chimbe Gwane Shisa Gozando Jengo Zedo So Hai, da nga zo gunung kum chi kya kindarwa. Da shenpin chanchu sim se, lo jang da, lo jang jang jang, thangbu gunung je kura. Gunung la ya da, chö kadu chi na toda nyi la, chawa nyi se, thongme gunung da. Ane tame ngawa nyi di da, kechi mo shib zigi yorwa che zang. Thongme gunung di nga ranzo zinda di, da nyi ya di, ranyi ji goyo go tonda ma yin ba. Ane rāna tside le kadin jingi pama nyi zuwe simjin tamje gi tanda duwe shi diwe nge samba sangbo shi gyutuwa shi tiye shi di chwe di nyingi yin samba gune gulung yagu chik seta sho sira.
Correcting our intention, which should be one of concern for others' welfare, the Bodhicitta. We train the mind, train the mind, train the mind. But before training the mind, we have to motivate. As it is said, one action at the beginning, one at the end. At the beginning, we have to develop the correct intention, motivation, and at the end, we have to dedicate. So in the light of this class, then, we are motivating that it is not just for oneself, but for the kind Father, Mother, sentient beings surrounding you. In order to fulfill their needs, one will cultivate a kind heart, motivate that.
다 가오고 뭐 직내 당하는서 미르된이 semba상고치에서 신변그 로지에데 다 미진한게 신변 계직직게도 이네 소남랍 첨부사도 요래서 근데 소남사야라 다 소남랍 첨부사고 요래 마사는 가서 딕바 슉 첨부 요인자 되게 되미요디 동해담을 용고 요래 디파 세기네라 소남랍 첨부고 요래 소남랍 첨부 써야 돼 아니 신변게 로지에데다 하장게 소남 사야게 다 탑람 유나메나 디레 제가 단단하란지 군론디 최년에 신리 통다 신기 치드닝기 소남사게 요로 근데 내가 지에데 신기 튼데 이미지 말한 거 통다 미 삼삼당도나 아니 소남사게 요로 제산디 인디네 튼데게 삼노치 단데 땅기 총어디 깨워상보이 하고디 디 신뱅 로제단 그림바데 단다다 남림나라 세보 지지 송구도 튼데지 인기 총어디 깨워상보이 좀 가와 공부를 했어.
We can now rejoice that we are human, and within that, in the context of this life, we can cultivate concern for others' welfare, uncontrived good heart. One moment of cultivating such an attitude produces great waves of merit, which is virtue, but the opposite is the case if the minds tend to non-virtue. Varieties of suffering ensue. Well, in terms of the collecting merit and completing it, Bodhicitta is it's the sole method indispensable in that sense. for collecting a vast store of positive energy. So therefore, one motivates to listen, whether one is listening to this Dharma teaching or working. If one does it with such an altruistic attitude, merit results. So one should rejoice that one can hear the method of altruism which are laid out clearly in the stages of the Lam Rim. So we are fortunate to listen. Rejoice.
아야 나 알아서 제가 심디 가두이네 양지 다다베 가나 야투비나 아니 비미시다 지 가서래 자와 납침부 치투비야당 심마투비야당 니치 시스템게 강에도 시도해야 돼 납침부 시오 제가 다들 낭배게 납자 숙지슈지를 나대기 재미주스 대외내주 기체라 심 도요와 말했어 아 마음배 뒤마서서 마음 방아 된데든데 저는 세야데 삼는 당기요 말 다다 심 다다 강 고급 다다 강 다대게 심 니시와 배낭 알아서 단다로 오지나 강이 개요 말하고 수직을 강이 요 말하고 단다 삼는 당시면 내가 그러면서 강이 요 말아 그래서 단대내가 강이 매워디 니 시베체 만화도 망고지라 즉 심나라 마지바다 도과다 남도다 심대다 즉 제대야데 대외다 수수수기 나란저 메제나라 내가 누가다 야가 망고 중요를 디난네 누가도 얘기하자 태용제 야로 누가네 누가라고 아니 셈마지고 소용보다 제가 디중원에서는 찾아라다 이나야 셈나라 디 템바데 대제데 근데 거를 잡지 되나 세상 딜렐 하고요 말에 나르되게 재미주세요 지금 디인도 다다와게 아니 저어디 가나 심내 두이나 다대 가나 심원에 내두나 한번도 셈데 부구춘주 셈나시 차로 부구춘주 셈나 다다면시 시대요 만져서 부구 개목게야 먹고도 하고도 먼저 개무시다 개 민족에서 나다 대변의 셈 창마 대월로 도사다 다다와 제사 디케 전부지 그래서
One important point is if one is able to rest the mind or keep the mind in the present moment, actions that we do become vast. Not only that, one is able to, if one's in the present moment, one ceases to project so much, but also one is able to purify a lot of suffering. Therefore, the advice that comes from the Dharma that says, don't revolve or fixate on what happened in the past, neither think about what's to come, place the mind in the present moment is a tremendous piece of advice. Because if one is able to place the mind in the present moment, it presents tremendous opportunity for peace of mind. So let's give an example. Now, here we are in this current situation. We don't have huge problems. What's important is that we recognize the current situation as lacking huge problems. And the reason our minds get upset and lack peace is because in the past, the deeds we did, some of which were positive and some of which were negative. We tend to fixate on the negative and just go round and round with the things that we did negatively in the past. But the past is past, and that should be left. It is similar to children who are really kind of spontaneous and in the present moment they're able to laugh a lot and don't constantly think about the past. We should endeavor to be like that. Mm-hmm.
다 심 다다와 간라 심 가지고나 신도 되니 로 제제 되도나 다 약쇼들이로.
Now, within that premise of keeping the mind in the present moment, best case, concern for others, altruism.
그다 신도 되니 로요나 니 심나 감다다 토바다 남도다 니 딘데시다 치고요 요 말아 가서 님 지금 나라도 가시 수수티리 미가실라 마가와 책도
Yeah,
아니 마가웨 용고 말아가 미디 돈다 지긴 딜레 편도 지긴 삼나 아니 편도 지서들 마가와 전에 용 말아라
yeah.
지산디 신도 되니기로 장와스디 다디 메제나라 메제 단낭베기 중내시는 메제 된단 덴바 차바 차라 신도 되니기로 된시면 안에 아니 신 메제디 신게 최도 미신 심지 신 조신 디주니 내가 지도베이나 다 메제 된단 덴바래로
So then, in that case of Tangwadi, Miludin Shinjbe, Tangwakari loves.
신도 되니기로 심디 다다와 신도 간나 되나요 그래서
So it is the case that if we are able to place the mind in the present moment, then there will be, and in that there are thoughts for others, then there's less chance for like worry and confusions because your minds are other orientated and there's less chance for aversion because you're not going to have aversion to others if you are thinking of helping them. So that's why we have to train in thinking for others. And when we talk about, in the context of Buddha Dharma, making one's life meaningful, benefiting others, benefiting sentient beings, concern for them is that.
다 신도 되니 로 장완들라야 네 로드 기베 시도와 써야 되는 것도 돼. 달로 기생이마 당념다 마신 틴딘 틴소디 예도 돌아.
Yeah.
다 제단 로드 장웨 시도래. 다 신도 되니 로지야게 다 유진도 시도지. 멍시로지 띵래. 다 되네 네 로드 기와 ngo여서로 다 로드 신도 되니 로 롱어스 계단데 칸데레스다. 아니 이원 참바
Now, the basis for that concern for others, or bodhicitta, or the foundation, we've been through in the last weeks, going through first achieving impartiality or equanimity for all sentient beings, and having affection for them by means of recognizing them as one's mother, recalling the kindness and then the wish to repay that kindness. So these are the causes for the actual production of that mind. So now we come to the actual production of it. Foundation done.
다시는 로디 지와 ngo여 되려야 네 참바 공부하러
Yep.
참바 공연도 참바 써야 돼. 미국 가래. 무슨 참바 써야 돼. 참바려야 돼. 다 그런저 재워라야 돼. 봐. 참바게 재워 참배게 미국 가래서 대화도 믿음배 심지로.
Yep.
대화도 믿음배 심지는 되다. 당연히 미국의 유래. 대화도 믿음배 심지.
Yep.
다 대화도 믿음배 심지 수레서는 코알라 내든 적 심지 탐제다. 넘버디 다 디도디 대화단 테나 찜말. 아니 대화단 퇴월 유지냥. 다 된대기 심지라 아니 참바서라 될라고요. 대화도 되는 찜말은. 봐.
Yeah.
대화매의 심지, 대외 풍대의 심지. 도줄라 대화지 퇴로시나, 대화지 중로시나. 대화다 mel라면 전에 교제다. 대화다 퇴워지. 퇴워지. 다 나랑 게 대화 퇴워지기 있어.
Summarwadi.
어딘데 삼담 당고 요랬을.
So first, when cultivating actual bodhicitta comes how to cultivate love. So with this cultivation of love or closeness, the first thing is the focal object. So what are we focusing on? What's the object of our love? Our object of love is all beings who are bereft of final well-being and happiness. All sentient beings in samsara are the focus of our attention. And What is the aspect of that focal object? That they don't have the happiness they wish for. Now, with that comes the first thought. How nice or wonderful it would be if they were happy. Secondly, may they be happy. And then finally, I will cause them to be so.
다디 간저 참바스는 가로라고 이런 뭐디 신고를 당보러와 제단
Yeah.
대화다 당저 학바디다 안아저 제단저 안아저 예용기 미 대화면은 비조디 안저상 미창마다 디다 내가 야고 유저를 튕거더라
Yeah.
아니 미디 주툭 깨져셔나 아니 파제 셈다 녀우체 깨져셔나 아니 수수 등원에게 대화 동해디게 주 하고도 하고도 아니 수수 뒤용 공자되네 공부 미괴나라 도서 그스 하코디 미괴나라 어디서 줄리제 그래서 아직 대화 대로시나 대화도 대마 주제 대화도 대망에 치기 어디 된데 시제네 전부 공단데 독세는 공부 열에서
So we have to know what defines the love that we're meditating on. It is that beings are bereft of the final happiness they seek, they are without it. But one has to start with the beings in your immediate environment. Because when you first see people, you think, oh, they're doing okay. But as you talk to them and come close to them, and close here means making a connection with them, one begins to see that they're going through sufferings. And they might say, oh, I'm experiencing 1, 2, and 3. Things are not okay. So here, one's focal object of meditation is not generically all sentient beings, but those that are immediately close to you. And in doing so, more benefit. Yes, generally in cyclic existence, sentient beings are bereft of happiness, but we want that close feeling of them being family. So one has to connect and talk, and then you can know what they're going through and then say, oh, I'm not happy. Then when you go back to your meditation, you can take that reference point of experience and go, how wonderful if that being had happiness. Secondly, may they have it. And finally, I will cause them to be so. That's more practical. No.
다디 칙디 코데오도 당한서 지난서 칙니라 쳐타브레 그래서 니만니만나 가져야 두두 그된데 곰 잡tum나 아니 야고 열어와
Yeah, so now words are easy to go in the mind and to read, but of course, day by day one has to reflect and meditate on it to one's ability.
된대로 세상다 되지 근데 나 잠바 곰배 평형 가려야 해서 나단당은 베제나라 페이디 갈셔서나 근데 도그 칙든데시 도 된다데 갈셔서나 아니 고볼라 냠바쇼고 다좀 버와 다좀 버도 고볼라 냠바쇼고 텐데기 아니 망보베디 치우지 가다동다기 곰자바 딜레 디기베자와 딜레장 소남 딜레장 잠바 깨지지 곰바데 아니 소남 라체오레스 월라
What then are the benefits of cultivating such love, meditating on it? If you were to meditate on love for all beings for just one moment, that would far outshine the meditative equipoise of an arhat's merit for eons.
드네네 베로 제와 짜동도 창조에서도 gelong데 소남 십지사고 해서 오라 gelong직 두베이나 세계 최대 야샹발레장 gelong직 두베 소남데 숙차여서 오다 로 gelong직 두베 동바저라 gelong 동바데 소남데 가르냥고여는 세계 최대 야담바샹베 소남레 gelong직 두베 돔데 소남데 랍쳐 소남 랍쳐 지기로
Yeah. So the vows that one takes as a bhikshu, keeping them, is far more meritorious than, building or making all of these golden stupas, hundreds of them.
딜레장 소남 랍쳐셔로
Yeah, there's more merit in keeping the vows.
딱 gelong데 베 저와탁저로 베 자라 동라 저와탁저 이 소남 딜레장 참배 심 깨직직 깨와데
Yeah, but outshining that bhikshu's merit billions fold, just one moment meditating on love creates much more merit than that. So where are we?
And then the Umaranjit Jiu Sumja said, Pajuk in the Sumja and Yamatawarishi, two sumdi, Kala Jimbatanra.
Yeah.
Tig Jimbale Yang, Chanjuk Sem Kiji Kiwadi, and then Sonam Lachavares.
And Nagarjuna's precious garland also states, to offer 300 small pots of food, even 3 times a day, does not equal a portion of the merit of a fraction of an instant of love.
Chazanganzo, Shembengi Losini, that Shibuji, any Chambasea, that Shen Deva Dendu, somebody or
Yeah.
Digi any Sonam Tendeo, Haguardo, Chambayona, Hadam me, any Maranzo, that the me Gauchia, and ha Gajo Jimel, how does it
Support.
Gauchia,
Yeah.
Sungjochia, one day we are.
So such are the benefits of love, concerned that all beings are endowed with final well-being, that they don't have the merit from that. And also, if you have that love, you will be protected by gods and humans. That means that the deities, the gods, will support and protect your practice. They will like you. You'll also be liked by humans.
And Tibashani on the duties, Susula never generated in the Yuna, Dart in the Yuna. The Delaya and Chambagomba Yina, Dajomia, Talaya should. Menda Jabje, Tunja, Menda Jab, Tunja Jabje, Dajomia di Negavgi, T. Nangi Dao, and the Jesem which you told me some in the Resunda. Nangi Shedan Dao, Matuna Silva, Sim Nangi, and Shedan, Majedan, Kondo, Tija Matuna. Chigi Dao, Kazujumna, ya Pedogres, or Mana Dogres. That is Sevda, in some around the Putingi, any Ukraine like a Daman, Takuran Damana Dosara. The Tonga was Roya. The Marjan, Chita, Nur Tanga Chijita, Komaro, Kola, Zumuling, the Mimancha Magawacha, Yagamanga Magawa Chazade. The one redo. She's an analog, Shedan, Dejatan, Majetan, Ranjin Zidi. Maduna Chigi Dao Kazupaduna, ya paying res, Mara Dores, Chesa, Nangi Dao, Shedan Jamela, that Chambacomia res, Tiridoda. We need to read our.
Yeah. And also with regards to foes or enemies, the best way to subdue is with love and kindness. If you try to subdue external enemies with weapons, that could be temporary subduing of the external enemies. The great meditator Togmi Sampo, yeah, in the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, says that if you don't subdue the inner enemy of the disturbing emotions, such as hostility, jealousy, attachment, and so forth, trying to get rid of external enemies, they will only increase, because you haven't vanquished the inner enemy of the disturbing emotions. And we can see it, commensurate, for example, in Ukraine, where Putin invaded, and it seems from such an action we see he has gotten more enemies in the world, kind of like that. So what's really being said is that if you don't subdue the inner afflictions such as self-cherishing and so forth, you cannot begin to get rid of outer enemies.
That the Jerumushingi, the Nesonda, Tena, Kiwakarians. That Chambadi, Simjin Shin, Dewadi and Rosana, Simbe Sim. Kia Galaka your race.
Yeah.
Give the Galaka word, the United of Bezinche Resta.
Yes. So Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say, it is not easy, it's very difficult to cultivate such love, but you must strive to do so.
장딜에 일랍디 탄지네 식 다 디동도 참바다 닝제도서 다때 기억하고를 될래 전투된배 책제도서 책도서 당부 책도서 되는제로
Yes.
아니 책도서 되는제 당부배 책되는제 네 간다 아니 갈래 책대 된다서 안티네 갈래로서 냠nen제도 심나로 거도 셴 당부 책연제네 장제네 배전체고래서 어디서
Okay. In light of putting effort, what's good is that there are certain verses from texts, like the Compendium of Trainings, that support the validity of training in love. And you recite the verses first, and then you reflect on the meaning, and then you practice. That's so useful.
다 전부 공배 림버드 간대래 와나 간대스 공공래스 다배 비시 배 뿌다고 제보 십송더라
Yeah.
다 전부 공배 림버드 통마 수수 자실라 수수 가셔야들 메지디나 텔 공부래스 다로
What then are the stages for cultivating loving kindness? It is vast and excellent. The first step would be to begin with one's loved ones, one's close ones.
제가 티네 애니 파마 먼저 밤에 심지라 티네 달라봄 두세는 심지 탐제라 림베시도 공부했다
Yeah. So beginning with friends and loved ones. Second category are those neutral beings or strangers. And thirdly, including the enemies.
두세는다 심지 탐제라야 참 공부했어
And then finally, transferring your focus to each and every living being.
공배 림버드시라
Yeah, these are just the steps for cultivating through one's meditation.
다음은 곰주 가래스로 공배 림버드시 곰주 가래랍디 아니 지다 심지 동해에 동해기 양양삼이 닝지 깨워다 먼저 심지 동해 나줄라 삼도 닝지 깨용도
Yeah.
티난시 심지 다 사제기 되와 삼매기 되와며 대외 풍바 아니 대외 풍바 대외 풍배 풍주도 양양 삼대 안델라 콤네 네 대화다 텐도 강게 중거래서 가서나 다 대화 먼저 심지 신기 동해 통인데 동해의 테나서 인지 내용 거로 와 테나시 달라 사제 상매기 대화다 파샤다 닐라 와 상매기 대화다 파샤 다 사제기 대화 코백 대화 주조예요 만 주조 매바디 가래서나 아니 먼저 말한저 상매 내가 지어야 돼 조배라네 제 권다 만에서 먼저 내가 지어야 돼 대외 주두고요 말에 동해 주진양 두대요 대화 되냐 대외 주 두메시 두시니게 냠래 마치
Yeah.
두마시니라도 카드베잖아 동해 메되냐 동해기 줄라 나가 쇼쇼기 주두고요다 나가나서 그래도다 점블링 민반세 동해 주잖냐 주제 로데기도 동해 주로야가 싸워 상마 란진지 두고요래 라니 진지 그거 군지고 만한 진지 윤대 군지 라니 진지 어디나 어디 제산다 대화의 풍배 풍록디 어디 대외 주두고요 말에 동해기 주두 동해 두고요만 동해기 중앙시 또 동해 주두나 동해 연구를 알아 근데 거란 중이라 뭐 제산 대조다 ngoyne지로 봐대 상무당연데 아니 텔레콤 셈데나 레온데 아니 대화도 텐데기 참바 이게 연구를 해서라
Okay, so that's about the stages in terms of one's focus of loved ones, neutral and enemies. What about the actual way to cultivate that love? It is similar that strengthening one's compassion by seeing that sentient beings are suffering and the commensurate understanding of their suffering strengthens your compassion. But then in terms of love, by thinking repeatedly how sentient beings, living beings really lack all happiness, let alone uncontaminated happiness, which is beyond samsara. Even within samsara, they don't have contaminated happiness. And once familiar with that, then naturally you'll wish for them to be happy. It's true, isn't it? From morning to night, sentient beings go about their work really wanting bliss and happiness, but unbeknownst to them, creating the cause for suffering. So what they're really creating the cause for is further difficulties and problems because they don't know the cause of final well-being of suffering. As it says, the shloka chikkarza rangchinzi ra.
Ranyi jinzi,
Dungyo kungi go. Yep.
Mana jinzi, yendu kunji shi. Lama chora.
Oh yeah, so the verse from the Guru Puja, understanding that the door to all suffering is self-cherishing and the door to well-being is concern for others' welfare. I'll renounce the former and cultivate the latter. Please bless me to do so. So what that's saying is that self-cherishing is really the root of sentient beings' lack of happiness and suffering. But instead of cultivating the causes for the final well-being and happiness, they just cultivate more causes through self-cherishing for that suffering.
한다 준준나라 디와 동해 텐데 녀니 동해니 롱바 주스로 동해 텐데 로여야 나도 상마 동해 텐데 그 로여래 동해니 롱바 주스 동해기 유튜브야라 배 죽지 되게 오레스 대화 되냐 띠무베 랑이 대화 자다 좀 대화 되고 요레스 알로 띠무 미시몽베 랑이 대화데 다나시 파좀 샤거 매브 쇠샤거
Yes.
다른 거 있는지 레더로
Yeah, the reality stated clearly by Shantideva, although not wishing to experience suffering, beings rush, like a race to create the causes for it. And although wishing to experiencing bliss, out of ignorance, they destroy the causes for that bliss like an enemy. It's true, no?
그래서 말하는 딘데지 청나 딘데지 용거리 대화 용거리 삼삼지 여러 하다 디베나가서 미망부지다 말하는 메제나라야 가시니 배샤 망부쇼나 디기 용거리 탱고요래 가시니 아니 게다치 물어보쇼나 디기 용거리 탱고요래 가시니 아니 가셔 가든데 라면 좀 강바든데 지nyona 가 기부 용거리 디기 용거리 그래서 좀제 로그로 받아 간다 그래서 이거지 요마라다 요야지 요마라고
not valid reason. So then a lot of us will think kind of like, if I do this, then I'll be happy here. Kind of like, if I have money, I'll be happy. A lot of people think that way. Or if I'm famous, I'll be happy. And people have commented, if I get such and such a house built, I'll be happy. But the reasons behind that are kind of invalid. They're erroneous.
되네 당연한저 로다 지게제셰다레 레가치다레 망고지라 푹들라 란진진디 샤제 아니 레가단 게제셰사는 디 요야면도
Yeah.
되네를 강의 상마세 용거더라
And then when we're going about our work, when we're talking and interacting, self-cherishing is underlying it. So it's almost like there's no freedom from that suffering premise causally.
다 대화 용어야 규제 또도전이 신변 항상 남다게 신변 글로지를 제단다 란지제는 신변로 계세요 말하다.
이미 전단가워라. Yeah. But if one creates the cause and conditions for bliss, that can only be the superior resolve, what's it called, the superior thought of concern for others' welfare, because that is exactly in contradiction to self-fixation and self-interest.
진짜 대도 수수 말한서 수수 냠용을다. 수수 틀레니 미드서 따다로.
Yeah.
장문에 대외 풍바 세월에도 아니 인디도 아직 그래서 대화지 여러 제나 삼제 샘띵네 인데 삼로지 중부이나 당부 말한서 수수 틀레 여버디게 삼당으로다. 뭐 스투버디게. 디게라 로딜레비나 아니 디네파 칼레 삼다야.
장치로.
지금 먼저 산산이야 이제 냠내 체드 곰라고 잡지 심제 탐제 대화대로 하시나세요. 수수 틸레니 메들라 뇨르 잔냐서제 되나. 아니 대잔사시도.
Strange. So from your experience, from your own experience, looking at those that are close to you, are they happy? Do they have the happiness they seek? And then in your meditation, how wonderful if they had it, with those that are close to you. And then having begun at that, you slowly increase it. But it would seem strange to cultivate thoughts in meditation on male beings have the happiness they're bereft of, and yet the beings living close to you just make trouble.
Where
would that leave us? Yeah, all problems seem to come. Praying, not so difficult, right? All sentient beings, blah, blah, blah.
When
they're right in front of you, Yeah, but if you really think on their welfare, those that are close, that's where the potency is. Yeah. Now we come to the cultivation of compassion. What is the focal object here? It is sentient beings that are experiencing any of the three types of suffering or misery, suffering of suffering, suffering of change, compounded pervasive, very clearly laid out here. Yeah. So that first level of suffering, the suffering of suffering, as we commonly know, having a headache, a body ache, heartache, these common sicknesses. So that suffering of change, example, when we're hungry and we eat and satiate that hunger, we're relieved. But if we eat too much, we get sick. It is like that.
사제에게 대화 상무라 맨날 시내에도 저 유료에 동네래 사제에게 대화도 유료보다 사제에게 대화 탐제 코웨게 대화 탐제에도 유료에 동네 전자래 나 배샤요 나 지우 용 그래서 나니 찍찍찍다 코웨게 사제에게 대화 상무 아니 유료에 동네 사제에게 대화도 이게 차단 유료에 동네 전자래 다도
So that second type of suffering, the suffering of change, all of the contaminated sufferings in samsara are like that, isn't it? Well, they're all there. Like even within karma abiding, that can be the suffering of change, or even thinking that, if one gets money, one will be happy. That's change, suffering of change. We chase after objects of desire, thinking they are in the nature of happiness and bliss, but they morph into suffering. Now, one thing we all have in common is that we're experts in that suffering.
정말 디젤을 주도 거다. 동해에게 유럽의 동해디들라. 아니 사제에게 대화 되는 일이 대화 인생 거라. 뭐나 진짜 동해에도 와다. 먼저 뒤에 되는 일이 동해에도 동해 되는 얘기도 와다.
Yeah, I mean, all of these sufferings of change because we are chasing after contaminated happiness, impure, and these we think are in the nature of bliss, but they're really, their nature is not bliss. It's suffering.
네, 동해 순바디 겨워지지 동해서도 사제가 풍목하나래. 당도 무슨시하는 디그래로.
And that third level of suffering is easily just the five aggregates subject to clinging. No.
알아서 잡아 드셔서는 알아서 풍부디 레공 중에 풍부디 유친제라 아니 깨지 태나 남산동에 깨용도 되래다.
You know, this form aggregate we have that is a result of karma and disturbing emotions. Once it meets the condition, then you'll experience difficulty.
어디 동에 숨새 되래다.
Yeah, so that is the three types of suffering.
다 동에 숨대 디그리 단다 동에 죽다 동에 깨다.
Do you think that's enough on suffering? Would you like to go into the 6 and 8?
다디 디그라. 디 넘버 되래다. 신나로 심지 동에 나베 심지인데 넘버체. 믹바체.
But yeah. So now remember, we're talking about the focal object. Yeah. So what's the object of compassion? Is living beings experiencing any of those three types of suffering.
디 단다 믹바다 넘버다 세도 단다 돈데 도나데 치도네 야고요. 지메디 네지 루스스 곰든데 자위인데 공부 나와다만 샤운데 어데 믹바다 넘버도 여와체도 그러 배나 먼저 믹발란데 포바디 네데 포바딩에 돈 포보그라 믹바라 봐. 근데 포바지 심나라 지 샤데기도 하고 지 따티 포바디 닝지 야ring 뭐라고 지 나와지 심나라 샤데 유지로 포바디 약보도 우세 포바디 지 그와 장마도 우세로 진데 나와지 샤용 하시도 디 넘버 봐 그러
Right. So now it's good for us to understand these two things of the focal object and the aspect when we meditate, because when various appearances come in the mind, it's good to discriminate. Oh, that's the focal object, that's the aspect. So, for example, I can focus on this cup as a focal object. That's my focal object, the cup. When I hold it in my mind for a while, I can think, oh, it's that shape, or it's good, or it's bad, or it's clean. Those are the aspects of the focal object.
다 넘버데 닝지게 넘버데 가르스네 동해 대다다 테나 냠바당 태워 규지당 태워 다그 차오 냠바다
It's the sum diroanashi.
어레 지버데
Yeah. Now, what then is, we've talked about the focal object, what then is the aspect? The aspect is similar to love. How wonderful if beings were free from suffering. May they be free from suffering. And then finally, I will ensure they are separated from suffering.
제단 디체 다 곰베 구림치로 구림 간데서 당보술로 공부래 니버술로 공부했어 지버데 당보 수수기 가보 자와치세 될로 자보 근데 파마 되네 다 어딘데 시는 공부했어.
And similarly to love, these steps of cultivation are first you focus on loved ones and friends, and then those who are neutral to you, strangers, and finally enemies.
다 제단디 딘데 삼는 땅연디 당봉에라 아래지 땅용기 삼는 레드나 도저 상만 대화 동해 나와 찍버려샤스러와다 그래서 또 동해 나와 찍버 아니 동해에 태워 찍버 다도 스탠드 먼저 샘제 탐제 그래서 콜 내와 탐제 먼저 동해 요니 도부냐래도
Now, in this sense, the equanimity is important because other beings are in a suffering predicament just like you and want to be free from that predicament just like you. So actually, all sentient beings in samsara are our friends like that.
그다음에 곰잡디 네 단다 청원배 나는 시에도 내가시도 송도 제름 지가는 레레레레 상마담지 빼야지 심진 탐제에 가서 대화 동해ኞ나 동해ኞ도 찍봐 그러봐 아니 대화 된거는 대화 찍봐 동해가 나와 찍봐 대외 풍바 찍봐 이섬 여와다 그러봐 여와 연제매와 대상무유나 상상랑랑서 동해들에 다 잠불리나나 동해냐냐 알아지고 이엔텐데 말에 가지고 말에 심신 탐제 동해냐인데
Okay.
스테 lot of GL 팽그도 알아요.
Now, Lama Tsongkhapa stresses the importance of this understanding that all sentient beings are equal in this regard. From our perspective, that they all want the bliss, final happiness that they're bereft of, and they all want to be free of suffering that they are in fact experiencing. That's a very important point because you might get stuck thinking, I'm the only one in the world with this problem, or it's just me that's suffering. But when you think about it in this broad sense, it gives you courage.
되르바 당하는데 디 당보 다디 삼로 담만다 당해봐 당보 수수 가서디 삼로시 당한데 데라 닝지게다 참바게 레라고도 가르와
Yeah.
아니 디 좀zen 가르치는 기기도 가르와 아 미디 동에 수수 가서디 동에다 텐데게 저 가르치는 기기도 되네 근데 수수들 가기요라다 미디를 가기요라와 수수 가서디라 동해 중도 동해의 텐데 저 남산 기기도 대화 폰도 대화 대로시나서 남산 기기도 그 가르치는 기고라서 진짜 강한 게 아니 진텐바 진소와 두줄 요랑하는수 어디 수술로 편도요 가보요 봐도 수술로 편도요 수술로 저어되기요 수술 거딘 첨부이 근데 sometimes 인자 아니 인자다 밤에 샘제데 수술로 거딘 첨부를 해서 하나나다 좋아 아니 다디 거딘 첨부를 했어 다 디제도 샘제 탐제라니를 거딘 첨부를 디나 샘제 탐제 아니 동에다 테러 찌마로 태워주지 태웠다 그 차워서 네 근데 삼당고랬다
It is good to think on this with a varied kind of approach, lots of reasons. I mean, one could think first, why is it that I want my friends or my loved ones to have the happiness they don't have, or more, be free from the suffering they're experiencing? Why? And then in that sense, it's kind of because, as we went through with remembering the kindness of Mother, because they have helped you, in some regard, they've benefited you in this life. In the context of that kindness, one wishes to repay. So one starts like that with loved ones and parents. Then, when that is stable, increases it to neutral beings, and then finally enemies. And then once you have that, you start extending it, thinking, well, may they be free of suffering. How wonderful if they were free. May they be, I myself will cause it to be. That type of process.
다드네 곰베 림바디 도스무시 다 곰주디르와 곰주디 간레레 라윈디 다디야 곰주디 데스 멘다지 송다 참바다 아 당보 다치 마르주베 심제남 코와동데 코와지 동에 수수 동에 뇽제 두절로 삼제 안 동에 되다 게 동에당 동에게 남바되다 세 다 동에다 태난섬에 삼바 태난신 수술을 삼는 단으로 봐
Yes.
수수 동에 뇽데에 소리를 삼는 단지 아니 수수 동에를 삼는 단인데 아니 다 수수 동에다 텐데게 삼을 내는데 이중 내는 거요 봐 수수 동에를 삼는 단나 이중 거제다 다 수수 동에를 빠제 아니 수수 체디게 마게 좀베 녀라콤 파마심지 달라고메데 아니 인지게 다디데스 쳐와요 랑 동에를 삼는 단인데 이중게 당보디 제고고요래 디클로 고미야데 데 란진지를 두고요 망엘로 고미야데 심지신라 동에 심지신라 닝지제와 당 참바제야게 체디 셴뱅로 제야체디 공부유에 삼담베이나 디 란진지 차기요
Yes.
그다음에 디인도 수수 동 가시에 나오다 수수 닝지제야데 란진지를 두고도 삼다 디든데 말에
Okay.
디 란딩디 동에라 텐데게 저와지 매비이나 심지 신라 제토고 말아방도 봐. 제토고 말해서 뭔데 당보 수술을 삼다. 당고래스다.
So therefore, the actual cultivation of compassion follows, having gone through the steps. And one has to think now of the various types of suffering that beings are going through, both general and specific in terms of aspect, and may they be free of those. But the steps here are kind of a little bit unique in that one is doing that contemplation of suffering for others in terms of bodhicitta, but initially one does it with oneself as a reference point. So first you have to think how you yourself are going through these general and specific sufferings within samsara. And when the focal object is oneself, it is a means of renunciation. And when it's turned to others, slowly, friends, neutral and enemies, then it becomes compassion. Here, Lama Tsongkhapa reminds us this is not self-cherishing to begin with the reference point of oneself, one's own suffering to lead to renunciation. Because remember, your motivation is generating great compassion and bodhicitta for other, but without a clear recognition of your own reality of suffering, general and specific in samsara, how can you help others?
세상에 윤대시 윤한데 sonda 라니 시술로마 치신데 만주 도와군요 돈은 도와도 전주 심지 중앙 진주로 sonda 그래서 라니 시술로마 치신데 제가 수수 아니 코알라 동네 녀배 내단데 신배 띵네 심지 신래야 아니 삼로도 단네 전주 심지야 돼.
Okay. Just like it says in Foundation of All Good Qualities, just as oneself has fallen into the ocean of samsara, likewise have other living beings. So in that regard, please bless me to generate the bodhicitta thought to liberate them.
당연하죠. 수수 동에 요와디 시. 수수 동에 요와디 시. 동에든데 요나 아니. 대 동에디 시연도 동에들 텐도지 롤 끼기도 알아.
Yes.
대디 롤 끼와 나신지네 수수게 예영리에 미드들 아직 대 동에든데지 누가 동에디 테나지 말은상 봐. 배저 그 동에든데 통용인데 수수 셈로 초와든데 레tum나.
Okay. Now, it is good to think on one's own reality and one's own suffering and think it would be good to be free from such suffering. And reflecting similarly, when you see beings that are really close to you in your immediate environment, to your left and right, and they are going through sufferings, think how wonderful it would be if they were free from those sufferings. So seeing the reality and then thinking like that has benefit.
오다디 참바다 닝지 곰당게 아니 닝지 참바다 닝지스나 카레 닝지 고름 끼데 고름 컨데레 아니 곰당 그림바 컨데레 세부쇼로서 와다디 카르 곰나디 참방엘로 곰나디 닝징엘로 곰나디 디니로 고름에서 지 곰나 되게 알아서 네가 데블로 공 말해. 하면은 인지 곰나 되게. 다 스스 동해 나제 동해 배쇼지게 마셔도나 네 참방에는 곰나요.
오케이.
야 스스 셈데 내수 데오려 제제 쇼야 짜든지는야 인지 곰베이나 야고야. 탑람데 스스 내단 되게 아니 디 가르 곰베이나 찍기에는 찍기용 거래. 인지기에는 참바기용 거래. 참바기에는 인지기용 거래.
오케이. That then are the steps and ways for cultivating loving kindness and great compassion. And although the steps and methods for cultivating them are laid out for both of those minds, one does not necessarily need to work on cultivating them both. For example, you might just think great compassion or compassion suits you more. For example, if you're suffering a lot, it might be better to try and cultivate loving kindness. But commensurately, if you're too up and blissful, it might be better if you cultivate great compassion. You check the methods and you check what is going to suit you. And there's no particular order, actually. It suits some to cultivate great compassion first, yet others loving kindness first. But what is sure is that if you cultivate either first, the other will follow. No.
다간다 든다데라. 어디 곰데스 갸투나. 곰자 삼노당으로 와데서 곰자라다. 제금으로 받고 콤바제고 삼당 저거래야. 자동기 등기 삼당 저거래. 매달 취제기 삼당 저거래라.
Now, during the course of the week, our homework is to do analytical meditation on these points. Whether we're walking, drinking tea, watering the flowers, we should think on them.
Oh yeah, that is Shaura.
We'll stop for today.
Turning to page 31 for the short mandala.
Sanje shinde mide ewa ye dogo namda shin la chewa sho guzirate naga tene chochu kewa tang lo sa tebe roma rove menzen dado ne kyurchi yi tang guru rene mendela kamne yataya.
Page 33, prayers of dedication. Due to the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain safe and pure Buddha. May all living beings without exception stand in my way. May the Supreme Lord Bodhicitta embody the rising birth, and may their riches and self-preservation for whether in the psychostic tradition or meditation, grant me knowledge and acknowledge in my heart. Rejoicing in the present and past initiations, I now dedicate all myths to the following. By the victorious ones thus far, may the true Dharmas of Paths way of Dharma practice flourish. May the omens of obstacles be pacified, and all the conducive circumstances be complete.